Robert had been dreaming of his fishing cabin for months. While city life wore him down with traffic, endless meetings, and the constant hum of deadlines, he kept a mental picture of his quiet refuge in the woods, the scent of pine needles, the creak of the old dock on the lake, the hum of cicadas at dusk. His grandfather had built the cabin decades ago, a modest wood and stone retreat tucked into a corner of the forest where the land sloped gently toward the water. Robert had inherited not just the cabin, but also the right to use a narrow trail that wound directly from his property to the lake. That trail was more than a footpath. It was history. He could remember following it as a boy, running barefoot after his grandfather with a fishing pole clutched in his hand, listening to stories about patience, respect for nature, and the importance of standing firm on one's rights. So when he finally turned off the main road and drove down the dirt track toward his cabin after months away, he was buzzing with anticipation. The familiar trees arched overhead, dappling the sunlight across his windshield. He imagined unloading his gear, stoking the old fireplace, and then heading down the trail to cast his first line of the season. But as he slowed to park near the trailhead, his heart lurched. Something was wrong. Across the entrance to the path stood a chain-link fence, tall and gleaming like a wound stitched across the forest. A heavy padlock secured the gate, and on the mesh hung two glaring signs: private property, no trespassing, in red block letters. Robert slammed the truck in the park and jumped out, disbelief coursing through him. He checked the carved wooden marker nailed to the nearest pine, a weathered sign his grandfather had made to mark the trail decades ago. The marker was still there, proof that this was the right path. This was his path. Yet the way forward was blocked as though he were some stranger trespassing on land he had known his whole life. He rattled the fence, the metallic clang echoing through the trees. It was sturdy, freshly installed, and utterly unyielding. The realization hit like a punch in the chest. Someone had deliberately sealed off his only legal access to the lake. His mind spun with questions. Who would do this? Why now? The answer, like a shadow in his memory, came quickly: the HOA. The local homeowners association had long been a thorn in his side. Though Robert's cabin predated the HOA by decades, the board always seemed to meddle, sending letters about community standards or lecturing him on proper maintenance, as if his rustic cabin were a threat to their manicured ideal of suburban order. And at the center of it all was Karen, his nearest neighbor and the self-proclaimed guardian of the neighborhood's rules. She was notorious for policing lawns, measuring fence heights, and scolding children who played too loudly in the cul-de-sac. If anyone would erect a fence across a publicized trail, it was her. Robert stalked down to his cabin, anger simmering with every step. The structure was just as he remembered, weathered but sturdy, with its green shutters and stone chimney. Yet even here, in the shadow of the porch, he could feel the weight of the blockade behind him. He hadn't even unlocked his front door before he heard her voice. Well, look who finally decided to show up. Karen stood in her yard, arms crossed over her chest, her expression a perfect blend of smugness and irritation. Her blonde bob framed a face hardened by years of scowling, and she wore the HOA badge like a sheriff's star, clipped conspicuously to her blouse. Robert turned to face her, fists clenched at his sides. "Karen, what's going on with the trail? Why is there a fence across my access to the lake?" She tilted her head, lips curving into a smirk. "Oh, that. The HOA voted to restrict lake access. Too many outsiders coming through. We needed to protect the shoreline. It's for the good of the community." "Outsiders?" Robert barked. "That trail is on my deed. I have a legal right of way. You don't get to decide who uses it." Karen shrugged as if his words were trivial. "You weren't here to vote. We assumed you wouldn't mind. You're hardly ever around anyway." The board felt it was best to keep things tidy and under control. His chest tightened. He remembered his grandfather's words about legacy, about never letting anyone take what was rightfully theirs. "Listen carefully," Robert said, his voice low but shaking with anger. "That trail is mine. My father used it, my grandfather built it, and I will keep using it. A committee of busybodies doesn't erase my rights." Karen's expression soured, but she didn't back down. "We'll see about that. Around here, the HOA makes the rules. If you don't like it, maybe you should consider selling. This place is an eyesore anyway." With that, she spun on her heel and marched back toward her porch, her words hanging in the air like poison. Robert stood frozen, the weight of her arrogance pressing down on him. He glanced back at the fence, the cruel lines of metal cutting him off from the water he had loved since childhood. The sound of birds in the trees seemed hollow. The cabin, once a symbol of peace, now felt like a prison cell hemmed in by bureaucracy and petty power. That night he sat at the cabin's worn kitchen table, pulling out the folder of documents he always kept in a locked drawer. Inside was the deed, yellowed with age but clear as day, perpetual and exclusive right of access to the lake via the designated trail. His grandfather's name was there, later replaced by his father's and then his own. 3 generations, 1 line of ownership, and now a neighbor with too much free time thought she could erase it with a vote. As the fire crackled in the hearth, Robert felt a shift inside him. His anger hardened into resolve. Karen thought she could bully him into submission, but she had underestimated the strength of the legacy behind him. That trail wasn't just dirt and pine needles. It was his family's connection to the lake, their history written into the land itself. He would fight for it, not just for himself, but for his grandfather's memory. He rose from the table, went to the door, and stepped out into the cool night. The fence loomed in the moonlight, its shadow stretching across the ground like a scar. Robert stared at it, fists tightening at his sides, and made a silent vow. By the time he was finished, that barrier would be nothing more than a memory. The morning sun broke through the trees in slanted rays, warming the dew on the cabin's porch as Robert sat with a steaming mug of coffee. He had barely slept, the vision of that chain-link fence gnawing at him like an open wound. His grandfather's voice echoed in his head. "Don't let anyone take it from you, Robert." Those words had felt like stories once, lessons for a boy with a fishing pole. Now they were instructions, marching orders. Robert pulled the deed from its envelope again and ran his finger across the words, "Perpetual and exclusive right of access." There was no ambiguity, no gray area. His family's right to use that trail wasn't conditional, wasn't subject to a neighborhood vote. It was law, older than Karen's HOA, older than the neatly trimmed hedges and vinyl fences her group loved to brag about. That trail was his, and he was going to prove it. By mid-morning, he was in town, sitting across from a local property lawyer named Jensen. The man was middle-aged, balding and sharp-eyed, with a desk stacked high with folders. He adjusted his glasses. Robert laid the documents in front of him. "You're telling me the HOA blocked your lake access?" Jensen asked, flipping through the papers. "Blocked it, fenced it, padlocked it, and plastered it with signs," Robert said bitterly. "Karen claims the HOA voted to restrict access, and since I wasn't there, they assumed it didn't matter." Jensen's eyebrows rose as he studied the deed. A slow smile crept onto his face. "Well, she made a mistake. A big one. This language here, perpetual and exclusive right of access, means your right to that trail is permanent. It runs with the land. No HOA vote, no board decision, no self-important neighbor can take that away. They're in violation of county property law. If anything, they're trespassing on your rights." Robert leaned back, relief and anger mingling in his chest. "So what do I do?" "We'll start with a formal complaint," Jensen said, pulling a legal pad toward him. "The county inspector will come out, verify the violation, and order them to remove the obstruction. If they don't comply, they'll face fines, and potentially a lawsuit from you. My advice? Be patient, but firm. They're about to learn a lesson in property law they won't forget." Robert left the office with renewed determination. For the first time since discovering the fence, he felt the weight shifting back to his side. He wasn't just a man fuming at injustice. He was armed with proof, backed by the law. 2 days later, a white county truck rolled up the dirt road to his cabin. Out stepped Officer Delgado, a no-nonsense man with a clipboard and a badge clipped to his belt. Robert led him to the fence, pointing out the padlock, the signs, the carved wooden marker his grandfather had nailed to the pine tree decades ago. Delgado took photos, scribbled notes, and asked pointed questions. That was when Karen appeared. She stormed across her yard, her HOA badge gleaming in the sunlight like some self-anointed crown. "What's going on here?" she demanded. "This is private HOA business. You have no authority to be on this property." Delgado didn't even look up from his clipboard. "Ma'am, I'm a county officer investigating a potential property violation. Please stand by while I conduct my inspection." Karen's face reddened. "Violation?" The only violation here is him. She jabbed a finger at Robert, thinking he can do whatever he wants. The board voted, and that access is closed. End of story. This deed spells it out clearly. My right to that trail is permanent. Your vote means nothing. Delgado took the papers, scanned them carefully, then turned to Karen with the cold efficiency of a man delivering a verdict. He's right. This is a recorded property right. The HOA has no authority to override it. By erecting this fence, you and the HOA are in violation of county law. It needs to come down immediately. Karen sputtered, her voice shrill. But the community, the law doesn't bend for the HOA, Delgado interrupted firmly. If this fence isn't removed by the end of the week, your association will face fines of up to $500 a day. If the obstruction continues, it could escalate into a lawsuit. Do you understand? For once, Karen was speechless. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. She glanced between Delgado, the fence, and Robert, her face flushing a deeper shade of crimson by the second. Finally, she hissed, "This isn't over," and stormed back to her porch, slamming her door so hard the windows rattled. Robert couldn't help but laugh, a short, triumphant laugh that broke weeks of frustration. Delgado handed the papers back to him and said, "Don't worry, sir. The law's on your side. They won't win this one." By the following evening, the padlock was gone. 2 workers, clearly sent by a reluctant HOA, were dismantling the fence panel by panel. Robert stood on his porch, arms crossed, watching with satisfaction as the path slowly opened back up. Every clang of metal against the truck bed sounded like justice ringing in the forest. The signs came down, too, their bold red letters crumpled and useless. When the last panel was gone, Robert walked to the trailhead. The old path stretched ahead of him, dappled in sunlight, pine needles soft underfoot. He stepped onto it, savoring the crunch, each stride reclaiming what had always been his. The closer he got to the lake, the lighter he felt, as though every step was lifting the weight of Karen's arrogance off his shoulders. At the water's edge he stopped. The lake sparkled, ripples glinting like shards of glass in the afternoon light. He sat on the weathered dock his grandfather had built, the wood creaking familiarly beneath him. For the first time in weeks he could breathe deeply, without anger clawing at his chest. He baited his line, cast it out, and watched the ripples spread across the surface. This peace, this connection, was what Karen had tried to take from him, but she hadn't won. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Robert thought of his grandfather again. He imagined the old man smiling, pipe in hand, nodding with approval. "This land is our legacy. Don't let anyone take it from you." Robert smiled back at the memory. He hadn't just protected his own rights. He had honored his family's promise. From that day forward, the trail remained open, and though Karen still glared from her porch whenever he passed, Robert never let it bother him. She could steal all she wanted. The law had spoken, and the lake was his to reach. Each cast of his fishing line became a small victory, a reminder that sometimes standing firm wasn't just about property. It was about dignity, history, and never backing down to arrogance disguised as authority.